Welcome back to Source Decoded. I'm Benjamin. Code is meant to be read by humans. We talk a lot about simple code, making our code simple, and we say that simpler code is better. But what do we actually mean by simple, and why is it better? I define simplicity, or complexity, I guess, this way. The complexity is the number of things going on in a piece of code. If something has fewer things going on, it should be easier to understand because there's less stuff to hold in your head. So that means simpler code is more readable and is therefore better, right? Kind of. What's tricky here is that a thing can be just about anything. If you're adding two integers together, that operation is a thing. Or if you are going out to the internet to fetch data from a remote server, that's also a thing. The programming language you're using comes with a bunch of things, and our job as engineers is actually to make new things. Now, I'll bet you probably don't understand all of the things that come with your programming language. And if you work with other people, you probably don't understand either all of the things that they have made and put into the code base that you're working with. So if you imagine a chunk of code that only has 3 or 4 things in it, that's pretty simple, right? But what if you're not familiar with 3 of those things? Now imagine another piece of code that has 12 things in it. There's a lot more going on, but if you are familiar with all 12 of those things that are happening, that's going to be easier for you to understand. So simplicity and understandability, they're not the same thing. I think when we see something that we don't understand, we tend to call it complex. And on the other hand, if there's something that we do understand because the pieces it's made out of are familiar, we tend to call that simple. And when we say that code should be simple, what we mean is that it should be understandable. And even when we call code simple, probably what we usually mean is that we understand it. Now, complicating this issue is the fact that few of us code in isolation. Most of us are on teams and we have to work with other people. And if we work with very many other people, it's very likely that there's a continuum of experience and expertise on these teams that we work on. The more senior engineers who know about more things probably are going to write simpler code, but the more junior engineers who know fewer things are going to find that code complicated. And on the other hand, when the senior engineers look at the work that the junior engineers are doing, they're going to say that's complex because it's doing more things. I have seen a certain amount of frustration between the more experienced and the less experienced members of a software team, and I think this is one of the big reasons why. We don't all have the same definition of what is simple or what is complex, what is understandable and what is opaque, or what is a good solution and a bad solution. And I think many times it just comes down to the fact that we're not always speaking the same language. So what are we to do about that? Well, I think there are 3 things that we should all be doing. The first one is to remember that code is meant to be read by humans. And just like you would if you were writing a letter or an article, when you're writing code, keep your audience in mind. Think about who is going to have to read this and understand it, and write it in a voice that they can understand. The second thing we need to be doing is modularizing our code. This is one of the most important purposes of functions. A function is a thing that we can give a name to, and if we give it a good name, it will help tell our story. The last thing we need to be doing is learning as many things as we can. These things could be features of the language you're using, but they can also be patterns and paradigms that have been developed and accepted by industry over time. Understand what programming patterns are. Understand what functional programming means. Learn a lot of different languages and learn to think in a lot of different ways. The more things you know, the bigger your vocabulary will be, and the more expressive you can be when you're writing programs. And the more you will understand of the programs that other people write. All other things being equal, simpler code is better, but sometimes we have to make a choice between simple and understandable. When that happens, I think the professional thing to do is choose understandable. I'd love to see any questions or feedback you have in the comments. That's all for now. You'll see me in the next one.